Alayna Hardy was born on March 14, 1994, in Santan Valley, Arizona, and grew up in a close-knit family. She was raised in a supportive family that always encouraged her to pursue her goals. After graduating from high school in 2012, she moved to New York City in 2015 to follow her dream of studying nursing. In 2020, she settled in Harlem, where she loved the city's culture, food, and energy. Alayna made friends easily and was excited about her new life. She quickly connected with the people around her, especially her neighbors in the building. One of her neighbors was Fernando Munera, a 25-year-old man who lived on the first floor of her building. They became friends and soon after started dating. At first, things seemed great, but over time, their relationship became unstable and tense. What began as a simple connection slowly turned into something far more difficult for Alayna, and it would lead to unexpected and tragic consequences. According to reports from neighbors and friends, Fernando's behavior toward Alayna was increasingly controlling and abusive. While Alayna was known for being outgoing and sociable, often surrounded by friends, Fernando was much more reserved and possessive. Their relationship, which lasted for about 8 months, quickly became strained, especially after Fernando began exerting control over Alayna's life. He didn't like her talking to certain friends and would even intercept her phone messages, replying on her behalf and declining invitations she had received. Fernando's behavior grew even more troubling as time went on. He had a history of mixing alcohol with medication, and there were incidents where he would ride his motorcycle at high speeds while under the influence. He was involved in a minor accident, but it did little to curb his reckless behavior. As their relationship progressed, arguments between the couple became more frequent, often leading to temporary breakups, only for them to reconcile again. Over time, the police were called to Alayna's apartment multiple times due to domestic disturbances. These incidents were clear signs that their relationship had become dangerously toxic, yet nothing seemed to stop the cycle. Then, on May 13, 2021, everything reached a boiling point. During a particularly heated argument, Fernando became enraged and locked himself and Alayna in her apartment. He took her phone away to prevent her from calling for help and began destroying everything in sight, breaking furniture, electronics, and throwing glass bottles against the walls. In the chaos, Alayna saw her chance to escape. She managed to leave the apartment and call 911, and police quickly arrived at the scene. Fernando was arrested on charges of unlawful imprisonment, property damage, assault, and harassment. With his history of violence, everyone expected him to be held in custody. However, despite the serious nature of the charges and the police being called to Alayna's apartment on 6 different occasions, the judge decided not to consider Fernando a major threat, and he was released. After the incident, a temporary restraining order was placed against Fernando, barring him from contacting or approaching Alayna. Despite this legal measure, Fernando continued to disregard the order. Alayna made a conscious effort to cut him out of her life entirely, but their proximity, living in the same building, made it nearly impossible to avoid him completely. Fernando, unbothered by the restraining order, would often sit on the stairs of the building, waiting for Alayna's return, clearly trying to provoke her. His attempts to control her persisted, sending dozens of messages and making repeated phone calls. He would accuse her of dressing inappropriately and sometimes demanded that she return to her apartment to change. At other times, he used emotional manipulation, trying to guilt her into reconnecting. When that didn't work, he became increasingly angry, his obsession growing by the day. In the week leading up to the tragic events, he made over 80 phone calls to Alayna, each ignored but followed by more relentless attempts to reach her. Despite this, Alayna had some positive news. According to her family, she had just passed an important exam to become a nursing assistant and was only months away from completing her nursing degree. She was excited about the future, unaware that Fernando's obsession would soon take a devastating turn. On May 19, 2021, after relentless pressure, Fernando convinced Alayna to allow him to visit her apartment for a conversation. What started as a calm discussion quickly escalated into a confrontation. Feeling unsafe, Alayna made the decision to ask him to leave. Initially, Fernando appeared to comply, leaving without a fuss. But a few hours later, around 8:05 p.m., he returned and attempted to force his way back into her apartment by trying to break down the door. Terrified, Alayna immediately called the police. When the officers arrived at 8:15 p.m., Fernando was already gone. He had jumped over a fence at the back of the building and fled on his motorcycle. Despite Alayna's visible distress, the officers only took her statement and filed a report. They did not conduct a search for Fernando or issue a warning to nearby patrols. At that moment, the temporary restraining order was still in effect, meaning Fernando was in violation of the law, yet no immediate action was taken. The NYPD later reported that both a complaint and a domestic incident report had been filed. However, just 30 minutes after the officers left, another call came in around 8:45 p.m. This time, neighbors reported hearing Alayna's screams coming from inside her apartment. When the police returned to the scene, they discovered Alayna in critical condition outside her apartment. She had sustained multiple injuries and showed signs of a violent struggle. Alayna was rushed to the hospital but tragically passed away during transport. Fernando was found nearby with serious injuries, which were later determined to have been caused by Alayna in an attempt to protect herself. The investigation revealed that Fernando had entered Alayna's apartment, and a violent confrontation ensued. Despite Alayna's efforts to defend herself, she was unable to escape the situation. Fernando was taken to the hospital and, after recovering, was arrested and charged with several offenses, including murder. The events were the result of escalating tension and violence in their relationship. Alayna, badly injured and desperate to escape, managed to flee her apartment in a final act of bravery. But Fernando was relentless in his pursuit. Covered in blood and still wielding the knife, he chased her down the building's hallway. Alayna's screams echoed through the building, alerting neighbors who, horrified, quickly called the authorities. What happened next is the tragic outcome that has since become known. The news devastated Alayna's family, leaving them struggling to understand the senseless violence that claimed their daughter's life. Her father, Fernando Hardy, expressed his anguish, sharing how he had tried in vain to help Alayna escape her harmful relationship with Fernando. He had spoken to her on numerous occasions, advising her to sever ties with him. Lauren described Fernando as manipulative and controlling, a toxic influence on his kind-hearted daughter. Alayna's cousin Madison also spoke of Fernando's possessiveness. She explained how he isolated Alayna from her friends, trying to control every aspect of her life, and how his behavior seemed to become increasingly erratic. A close friend of Fernando mentioned noticing a significant change in him, describing him as impatient and easily angered, traits that seemed to worsen over time. These warning signs, however, went unnoticed or were dismissed until it was too late. The actions of the police were sharply criticized by a local domestic violence support center director following the tragedy. She voiced concerns that the officers had failed to protect Alayna adequately, particularly after the initial call. She emphasized that they should have stayed with Alayna for a longer period, conducted a search for Fernando, and assessed the immediate risks. According to her, the police's decision to leave Alayna alone and vulnerable highlighted a lack of urgency and a failure to properly safeguard her, pointing to a critical gap in training and response to such a severe domestic violence situation. In the wake of his daughter's death, Fernando Hardy, Alayna's father, launched a GoFundMe campaign to cover the costs of transporting Alayna's body back to Arizona and for funeral expenses. The campaign raised $21,500, which helped support the arrangements. On June 19, 2021, Alayna was laid to rest in a moving ceremony at Gilbert Memorial Park Cemetery in Arizona, attended by family, friends, and loved ones who gathered to honor her memory. On May 14, 2024, Fernando Munera was found guilty of second-degree murder, among other charges, following a trial. In June 2024, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Fernando, now 29, will remain behind bars until 2061, when he will be 66 years old. The sentence brings a sense of justice, But Alayna's family continues to mourn the loss of a young woman with so much potential. Alayna's tragic story has brought attention to the importance of more effective law enforcement responses to domestic violence and serves as a reminder of the need for greater vigilance. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel for more true crime content. See you next time.